Welcome to Markets Now. I'm Michelle Rourke along with Nick Tsiolis with Farmers Keeper, and we are seeing higher prices and everything but the hog market this morning, and grains to the plus side this morning, Nick, and you got to believe some of that is tied to the weather.
Yep, we're seeing probably our second or third weather scare of the year here as we're looking dry in a lot of areas out into the middle of the month. We're really looking at June 14th and 15th as we get further and closer to pollination in the I states, at least, to see what's that going to do, because that's really going to be our biggest breaking point when we get there. The moisture is not as big of an issue right now, but you want as much in the ground as you possibly can, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. How much weather premium do you think we need to have in the market right now? Because previous to the rally here, we hadn't had much weather premium in there.
Well, the past few years, we've been focusing so much on supply because it's been really dry, right? But we've got to look at demand factors too. Corn exports were really, really slow from last week. So in that sense, we've got a big crop in Brazil. If we don't have supply here, that's unfortunate, but someone's got to be buying that, and there's just not enough oomph there. So it's going to take a lot more weather premium, and that's why we haven't seen the markets react as much as they might in a normal year where exports are more at USDA expectations.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you make. And when we talk about, very tight supplies yet in the country, we still see these inverted markets in both corn and soybeans, especially with old crop gaining over new crop. How long do you think that will continue? Will we see that inversion?
I think we've got to wait and see from the buyer side as we get closer to pollination, where we get a better idea of what yields are going to look like. And that's really where they'll make their own decisions and say, hey, are we going to wait until the new crop and bid accordingly? Or are we coming up so short that we want to get as much of whatever's left in the bins as is possible? So again, that's why we're looking at that mid-June timeframe where our weather forecast will give us a little bit of a better picture going out into July pollination timeframe, which could be a little bit later this year just because planting was a little later and depending on where you are.
Right. So, Nick, we should talk about the fact that a lot of the elevators have already rolled from July to September, and what's going on with basis levels out in the country.
So depending on where you're at, we've seen basis start to scale back again. I'm hoping that with some of this news with OPEC cutting down production to boost prices, that some of the ethanol plants will bid up. We're already coming into a higher use period of the year here, so that could all pan out. But overall, still, as you look at any grain in the bin as old crop, it's still not paying to be sitting on that, regardless of where basis is, because up until some of these moves in the past week or so, it really hasn't made up for the losses in futures on the other side.
Yeah. And this recovery that we've seen in crude oil overall does kind of help the money flow in terms of outside markets into the commodity sector, though, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The funds are still net short on corn, barely net long on beans, but we saw them from last week increase their net long positions in both cases. So I always say, follow the smart money, see what they're doing. And they seem to be hedging their bets there as we see beans now head negative after the open, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't take long for them to pounce on any of those profits and take those away here. We are also going into the WASDE on Friday, so could some of this maybe be some position squaring ahead of that? And what are you expecting on Friday's report?
Absolutely. So number one, ahead of a report like this, when we're really just basically trading weather, that's where further out, we're going to be pricing into the market what average analyst expectations are for the WASDE. So in other words, if there's nothing else in the balance and we're just waiting on weather, that's what's going to occur. I have a feeling that we're going to come out and show even lower numbers than expected just because things have been so weak here. And that shows it just in the technicals, right? We might open overnight a little bit higher and then consistently selling off of that, or beans today opening up positive and not being able to sustain that. Something else that I'm looking at too is if you look at live cattle, we're about to hit a double top from several months ago. if we start selling off from that, that could signal a big downward move there. So there's a lot of different inflection points coming up here as we know what's going to happen with production overall over the course of this new crop that's fresh in the ground.
Yeah, when we talk about cattle, everybody wants to pick the high, but honestly, are these hedgeable levels?
Yep. So I've said multiple times with you, reward the market. If you don't want to make the most exciting sale you can make isn't at the top of the market. It's making a panic sale when things have fallen a bunch. That's a real exciting time to sell, but it's on the negative side. Make a boring sale, reward the market. These are great prices. And finally, I love seeing the producer be able to make more of that margin in a constrained supply market than what's been going on the past few years post-COVID, where the packers were getting a lot of that margin. Get it while you can, and there's plenty of things you can do to participate in the upside still. Just don't let that slip, because when the smart money comes into things, they typically like to take their profits and not hope for even higher. And because eventually there's no telling that the consumer won't come in and say, hey, it's finally summer season, everybody's out there grilling, and I can just as easily pick up pork or chicken breast rather than a steak. And that's a very real factor.
Yeah, no doubt. One final question on the WASDE before I let you go, and that's, June, obviously this report is not near as important on the WASDE as when we get to the end of the month and we have that acreage report. So do we anticipate, many adjustments?
We're not expecting to see any big changes here. And I don't think any producer out there that's feeling unhedged like a lot of guys are, that you need to set up any positions specifically because of the WASDE this time around. It's more directionally, like you're saying, going to tell us what's going on with acreage. But again, I would not be either selling or on the buy side buying around a report like this. If you're already following a certain course, looking towards pollination, I would stay on that course.
All right. And you're going to be out traveling around looking at that crop, speaking of pollination.
That's correct. I was out in northern Iowa all last week from east to west. This week, I will be back in Iowa a little bit, around Nebraska. I'm going to be in South Dakota. I'm going to be in Wyoming. So starting tomorrow, I'm going to be out for another week, going out, seeing the crop, visiting producers out there to really see on the ground level what's going on.
Have you been seeing some of the dryness or the stress on the crop here? I know it's early in development stages, but you see a few Twitter pictures showing some problems.
Sometimes those problems tend to be the ones that get the most attention. Certainly, if you look at the drought maps, that's increasing a little bit. However, last week, all 3 days that I was out in northern Iowa, there were spotty rains. Certainly nothing necessarily to write home about. But I think in general, we've got time to wait and see. Of course, sitting there as a producer, you're always going to feel a little bit more on the hot seat. But if you look in a lot of areas, even in Iowa where things look good, if you go more than 6 inches down, there's not much there. But we still have time to make timely rains. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're heading into a catastrophe either.
Yeah, this forecast, though, mid-June is going to be pretty important. All right, thanks so much. Thanks so much for joining us, Nick Tsiolis, Farmer's Keeper, and that's Markets Now.